All right, I think we're live. Hey, guys, John here, and welcome back to the Super Awesome Geek Show. Today, I've got Andy and Gary joining us for a very special panel because we have an incredible guest today, Gus Lopez. And Gus is here primarily to talk to us about the new Saga Museum that he's working on with Steven Sansweet and a couple others. And it's all putting together a giant Star Wars collectibles museum. There's four involved, right, Gus?
It's five collectors, four major collections that are involved.
Yeah.
One of them is a couple that collects, and then three others are individual collections. But yeah.
And is your goal to get just about everything, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes, but keep in mind, like in a public museum, and not everything's going to be on display at any given time. But we want to have archives that are comprehensive, and several of the collectors, a few of them are already endeavoring to do that. Particularly Stephen Duncan and to some extent, Vic and Lisa also, have collections that are trying to get most things. But yeah, I mean, we want to be comprehensive. And by the way, we aren't going to be limiting to just our collections.
Gotcha.
This is the start of it. We're the founding collectors of it. But once we get it off the ground, the hope is that we do recognize there are a lot of amazing collections that fill in all sorts of gaps and specialties that we wouldn't cover. And so we'd like this to be really the community's museum is the ultimate goal.
That's cool. So, Gus, I know we kind of jumped right in with that first question, but why don't you give some of our viewers a quick background of who you are and what you do in the Star Wars collecting world? Because you've been around as what's the acronym? SWC, Collecting Archive?
Yeah, Star Wars Collectors Archive, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I've been around, Star Wars collecting for a while, like many folks who grew up with Star Wars. I started to get back into it as a collector in the early 90s, and that gave me exposure to, as I was doing it. And I started out like many other collectors. It was like, at first it was about, completing the action figures I missed out on as a kid, and then it sort of progressed to, as I was buying collections and getting exposure, I got into a lot of other areas of collecting. But very early on, I think one theme in my collecting experience has been about community. It really has been like, I started the Star Wars Collectors Archive with some friends, and it was the first website, on Star Wars collecting in the world in 1994. And at the time, it was funny because, there weren't that many websites then in 94. That still predates Google and Amazon, a lot of those websites launching. But basically, people thought it was too niche and too esoteric to do a website about Star Wars collecting. And so it's kind of hilarious now because there's, thousands of them and lots of podcasts, and, it's obviously huge, and that's, Star Wars collecting is vast. But at the time, people thought it was crazy to have one devoted to that. But that's what we did. But I've done other things in my collecting, career. Like, I've run the collecting track at all the Star Wars celebrations. So since 1999 on, Lucasfilm has me select the speakers and do social events with collectors and do giveaways. And so basically the whole collecting area of Star Wars Celebration, I've run that for all of the US and international celebrations. I've also co-authored a few books with Duncan Jenkins on Star Wars collecting. So worked on things like in the 90s, we had these, worked on building communities. So local groups. So I built the first local collecting club in the US called Sarlacc, based in Seattle. And also, worldwide, like building, working on the first news groups on Star Wars collecting. So I've always really been about community. I really firmly believe that collecting is a social hobby, and that the more you interact with other collectors, the more you learn and grow as a collector, and it exposes you to new things. So that's always been sort of my deal. And so just sort of fast forward to Saga Museum, I had over the years had these discussions with various collectors of like, what happens to what we've been building up all our lives, and what happens to it when we're gone. And, I think a number of people always have this dream of putting it in a museum, but it's sort of an easier said than done thing. And so what I did is a few years ago, I reached out to the folks that are founding members of Saga Museum and said, would you be interested in collaborating to do a big public museum on Star Wars memorabilia. And I was pleasantly surprised that we're all into it and willing to devote the time and energy to do it. And so we started working on it a few years ago, and then went public with it last fall. We're doing a fundraiser for Rancho Obi-Wan, which is itself a public, I mean, it is a public museum, but it is on a private residence, and so it has limitations to the extent to which we can do big events and all that. And so we said, what if we take it to a new level where we're in a public space in a heavily touristed area at a much bigger scale and combine additional collections and really build the museum that's going to outlive all of us. And so that was the vision, and so that's what we've been working on.
Yeah.
Gus, do you guys have a location for that yet?
We've not yet. We're hoping to maybe by end of the year nail that down. We have several cities that we're targeting. So there's several cities that we contacted and said, hey, we're interested in doing this world-class museum. And we wanted to get input from them about, if we brought this museum to your city, what could you do for us? That was a good idea. Part of it. And so we're in that dialogue now. So we have about 8 metropolitan areas we're focused on. And it's not necessarily restricted to those 8, but we're really kind of heavily focused on those 8 cities. And we did a very thorough analysis of all the factors that go into picking a location. It will be in the US, but we have cities. Some of the cities are, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Dallas, Chicago, Boston, New York. So we have 8. Yeah. So it's around, the whole country. And so we'll see where that lands.
I was wondering if you might try and do it in a city that has a Star Wars connection to it, like LA or San Francisco, or, even doing it in the UK or something like that. But
yeah,
that would be quite an undertaking. But
yeah, well, no, that's definitely a factor. So LA and San Francisco have a huge, affinity to Star Wars, the history of Star Wars. So that is a major plus in favoring those cities. So that definitely goes into the equation of like where we end up eventually, because we would love to do it in a place where it has that history. There's other factors, of course, things like costs and
taxes
and tourism and all that.
Dallas is fine, by the way, just putting it out there.
Yeah.
Tax
See, Dallas has a lot of advantages that way. Yeah, cost wise.
You definitely want it easy to get to, though. If I'm flying into another city to go to it, I want to be able to get off the airplane and get right to the museum. I don't want to have
DFW is perfect. It's central location. It's a great hub. I'm just letting you know that it's absolutely fine.
Yeah. See, we want to get the actual development people in city governments to be having that conversation you guys are having, where they're sort of like competing with each other to say, hey, well, we'll give you a building, or we'll give you land, or we'll lease a building to you for 100 years for $1 a year, if you come to our city, things like that. And that will have a huge influence on picking a city, right? So if one of these cities gets to a point where they're willing to give us space, that's major, because that really reduces our fundraising objective. We don't have to go as deep into fundraising versus if we have to build it ourselves.
Yeah,
I remember picking up a leaflet at Star Wars Celebration Japan recently, and I think I asked about the timing. Can you explain about sort of the timing of when you think that this will come to fruition?
Yeah, great question. It's something like this takes a long time, and so for the big public-facing museum, our estimate is we're about 5 years out, and it could go as long as even 10 years, but ideally it'd be like 5 years out. We would be ready to open the doors. In the meantime, and we're going to talk about this a bit, we have a panel at San Diego Comic-Con, and we're going to get into a little bit. We don't want to wait till then to start engaging with the public. So we are already actively planning public exhibits, so that and even after we open the doors of the museum, we have so much stuff and so many stories we can tell with the artifacts of this museum, that while we're open, we can have touring exhibits, pop-ups, and temporary exhibits. So we're working on actively right now is ahead of the official launch to do a pop-up where we're running a museum, and then also that we're going to have touring exhibits, at other venues like other museums. Now, a lot of this is just, nothing has been confirmed yet, so we're still working on it. And everything I said there, we could change our plans, but that's what we'd like to do, so we don't have to sort of wait 5 years. We would love to get our message out there way ahead of when we break ground on an official public museum that's our permanent museum.
That's cool. Yeah, no, that's a good idea. I've enjoyed a lot of the. I remember when I lived in Seattle, there was a number of times where we all got together and went to some of those traveling, like the costume exhibits and other artifacts from. Like you actually put a Yoda in one of the exhibits that we all went to, and it was fun seeing all that stuff. And I imagine that's what you're thinking, right? Stuff
Yes,
like that.
like the costume exhibit that Lucasfilm put together, Mopop borrowed. They borrowed mine. I have a Yoda rehearsal puppet. It's basically it's more like a Muppet-like version of Yoda. It was an early Yoda they built for Empire Strikes Back, so Mark Hamill and Frank Oz could work on the interactions. And so I had that piece, and that was on the pathway to the gallery. They showed that piece. I've loaned things to Mopop over the years that I currently have stuff on loan to them. But yeah, we're thinking along those lines. And one of the great things about the traveling exhibits is it doesn't limit us to just the United States. We can then have them go internationally.
There you go.
And so that's one angle of how we get an international reach is through the traveling exhibits.
Yeah,
So,
one of our guys is saying it needs to come to Canada. And
Yeah.
he was asking when Star Wars Celebration is coming to Canada too.
I was at Celebration in 22, and you guys, well, it was the Rancho Obi-Wan, but it was a Boba Fett.
Yeah.
It would be something like that. That's kind of on the move. Is that's I'm
Yeah.
around.
Yeah,
that.
no, I'm glad you brought that one up. So that was the Boba Fett to Bo-Katan exhibit. We had a few smaller displays, but the main exhibit was Boba Fett to Bo-Katan, and sort of celebrate Mandalorians in all of the Star Wars, shows and movies. And we actually, before we had announced our plans to do the Saga Museum, we actually branded that exhibit the Saga Museum Presents. So we sort of covertly were teasing the Saga Museum concept, and it was the same collectors behind it. But it was before we had announced our intentions for a public museum. But we used that event and Celebration Anaheim to really test our and get experience with doing a big public exhibit ourselves with the different collections. So it is that kind of thing. I do think that the type of exhibit you might do at Celebration would be different than if you're in a science or engineering or history or art museum. Like that was I love that exhibit. It was very geared towards Star Wars fans, right? Like you kind of can go in assuming you at least know Boba Fett, but like some of the Mandalorians, you have some of the background on their role in Star Wars, so you could do very dense exhibits with lots of artifacts. And there's still a narrative that took people through the exhibit, but it was very centered on here's something about Star Wars. Whereas like when we do it in our museum and we do it at other museums, they might have a different flavor. Like you might be, for example, if you're in a history museum, you might tie in Star Wars in relation to events in history where Star Wars draws from those events to shape the story and the style and the art design and so on. So they'll have a different flavor, depending on the venue. And even in our museum, there are going to be moments where we do something about science and a STEM focus. And then there are going to be other things that we'll talk about how Star Wars became big and became a pop phenomenon. So they'll have even different galleries will have very different emphasis. But the Boba Fett to Bo-Katan was really our chance to get very hands-on and do an exhibit, and it was tailored for that audience at Celebration that would get really into it.
Yeah, I thought it was awesome, and everybody that I walked through with or that I knew there that went through it, they all loved it. So I thought it was pretty well received. Did you feel the same way, I assume?
Yeah. I think we thought it went really well. We had lines out the door, often. So it was like, yeah, that's a good sign that it was pretty popular. And we were up on the third floor. We weren't exactly in an easy place to find, and it worked quite well.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
but you're very used to the end of line sticker or the poster at a Celebration or San Diego Comic-Con. So what is the panel called at San Diego that you will be hosting?
Yeah, it's the title is the Saga Museum of Star Wars Memorabilia. So it's just basically the name. Yeah, and we're on, I want to say Friday. Let me double check, but I think it's Friday at 5. Hold on a second. I'll tell you in 1 second. Yeah, so we're Friday at 5 o'clock in room 7AB. So it's a pretty big room. So definitely encourage lots of people to show up. We have a lot of capacity. So we're going to have quite a few of us there. So we'll have we're going to have Steve Sansweet and Newman, Duncan Jenkins will be there, Michael Wistock and Rich Smolin. So people that have been really on the core team working on Saga will all be involved.
Now, you mentioned Duncan earlier, and we know Steven. How long have you guys known each other? Like, when did you come across Steven and Duncan and these guys?
Yeah, I met most of them in the 90s. I think I've met all of them in the 90s. So okay. So Steve was in like the early 90s. We knew of each other before we met in person, but I met him at like when I went to Los Angeles for shows, for like toy shows down there, and got to meet him then. And Duncan around the same time. With Duncan, it was kind of interesting there. So back in those days in the 90s, it was like a lot of people bought things in Toy Shop magazine, right? That's how we acquired things. And I kept running into, dealers that would mention Duncan's name, like that he was shopping for similar things that I was after. And Duncan was running into me that way too. Like he talked to dealers in Dimension. So one day I just called him up and said, "Hey, I just keep hearing your name. So I just want to introduce myself." And so this is, I don't think he was even online then. I don't think he was on the internet at that time. Yeah. So it was just, I reached out to him and we sort of connected then. And then Vic and Lisa I met. I've known that they were in the Seattle area, but they had been in our group, in our Sarlacc group, but they never really attended anything until about 99. And then I met them for the first time at the Midnight Madness for Phantom Menace. They were at the same Toys R Us that I was at. And so I met them in person then, and then they started coming to local events shortly after that. So yeah, I met all of them. In some cases I've known some of them for over 30 years. So it's quite a long time. But we've built great friendships and we've collaborated on a lot of stuff over that time. So I knew these were people that, I trusted and had a similar passion.
Well, that's kind of the same thing with our group. It's, I had the fortune of being in your clubs in Seattle and then also in Rochester with Randy Eddy and the group out there. Like they started around 94, probably later in the year than you did. So I have the fortune of being in two of the longest running Star Wars clubs, I guess, which I didn't even know until you were talking about it. And but yeah, it's like you said, the friendships and these collaborations and working with everybody to help you get, like, I love it when we have different focuses, because it's like, oh, you want all the Darth Vader stuff, I want all the Yoda stuff. This works together, and these friendships are what makes it fun. Yeah,
I agree. I think that's it. And many people will even go as far as saying like it's the people and the stuff is really secondary,
The stories, like you said, some of this stuff has great stories attached to it. Yeah.
Gus, with 4 real big collections coming together for this Saga project that you guys are doing, no collections are exactly the same. Everybody has their focuses and their favorites and all that. What would you say you're bringing to the table out of the 4 big collections? What are you offering that the other 3 aren't?
Yeah, great question. And as you point out, like every collection is unique. I think I go on a tangent first, and I'll come back to your question. One of the things I get when I visit people and they show their collections is that a lot of times they're like, because they know the stuff I've done in collecting, they're like almost like embarrassed to show their collection. And I always point out to them that like I've never look at I think every collection is unique. The only collections I ever find boring are the Me Too collections, like people who just copy, what Keep Up with the Joneses kind of thing. Like to me, if a person has really focused on a unique niche or specialty or the thing they like, it's always interesting to me. Even if it consists of items that I've seen before, I find every collection interesting. I like touring collections, even smaller collections, even people haven't been collecting that long. So I think all collections are unique. So the 4 collections that are coming together do have different emphasis, and different specialties. They overlap in a lot of areas, which is good actually, because when you build a museum, you want to have solid archives, and you might actually have multiples of some things. But where like Steve is very strong in like folk art and community related items, in addition to all his amazing, you know, world-class collection and sort of Guinness World Record, you know, biggest Star Wars collection in the world. Duncan has a very strong international focus. So a lot of, he has, you know, just, you know, he and Duncan's collection, you know, is well known, not as known as Steve's per se, but Duncan probably has the next most comprehensive collection in the world. Like it's probably number 2 to Steve's in size. So he's a completist. He has, you know, he has a vast collection, but he's very strong on the international, particularly like the international toys. He's just, so he'll bring a lot there. Vic and Lisa have a lot of stuff that is like higher end, just very like replica props, some prop pieces, things like that are big display items. So they bring a lot of unique stuff there. What I would say where my collection fits in is, so I'm not, the other 3 have huge collections. So the irony in all this is I actually have I have a tiny collection compared to the others. So
but to me, your collection was massive. Yeah.
So, but yeah, like, so the whole Saga Museum will have, we estimate, over like 1.5 million items. I only bring like maybe 10,000 of the, like, which is a lot, but it's not, compared to the other collections, is tiny. But the way I collect is I don't collect everything. I have areas of focus, and I go very deep into those. And what, you know, my thing is, you know, I have a lot of things from the movies, and a lot of like, so really my strengths in my collection are movie memorabilia. So that can be from artwork to matte paintings to special effects models, costumes, props, things used in the movies. I have, you know, when you look at the space in our house that's taken up by displays, the vast majority is that stuff. But I also have pretty good depth and good representation in toy prototypes. I have quite a few, the range of, like, pretty well represented on the unproduced toys that Kenner had considered. So I'm very strong in that area, and so bring a lot of that to the table. And then other categories like food related items, particularly cereal boxes, and then cast and crew items, very deep, comprehensive, probably the world's biggest collections in those areas. So that as well. So, you know, all the collections are complementary. My theme has always been, really, if there's an overarching theme to my collection, it's always been about what's challenging to find. I get very, you know, into like the thrill of the hunt, and also learning and mapping out areas of collecting that aren't well documented, and trying to be like discover and really chart new territory. And so the areas I collect are really consistently like all over that, like, and it might not seem obvious on the surface, but like tracking down like every cereal box in the world, especially as they continue promotions, but also finding obscure variations from the vintage years, is very similar to trying to find every cast and crew item they ever made, where they did like jackets that only the sound unit of the Phantom Menace got, you know, and there's 8 of those jackets and you got to find one. And it's very similar to finding things that were actually used in the films, where there's like often one of a kind things. So they're all super challenging areas. And I just love, I have a big theme about collecting as requiring, and not requiring, but like leveraging skills and experience you get as a collector. I think oftentimes, you know, people oversimplify collecting and tend to think, well, if you were there first and threw a lot of money at it, you got this, built this great collection. Like, there's way more that goes into collecting. Like, and so I've always, like, I feel like there's a lot of skills to develop as a collector that I have always challenging myself to develop. So that, like, how you network, having the right tenacity, knowing when to splurge, how to budget correctly, just knowledge about the space you're going after, you know, your buddy network, all that kind of stuff. There's so many things that go into collecting. And so for me, I've always tried to push on what is just super hard to collect. I try not to constrain myself. A lot of collectors, I think, go into it like, what's available to me, what's in front of me. And dealers love that because it makes it easier for dealers. But I always start from like, what's the vision? What am I going for in my collection? And even if it's freaking impossible, I'm going to like figure out how to get to that. It's just start from what I'd like to get to and then try to work my way there. So that's been the theme in my collection. And that's sort of what I think my collection brings to this. But there are other collections that aren't part of these 4 collections that would love to have part of the Saga Museum over time, because there's so many great, unique collections.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you touched on it quite a bit, but again, how does Gus Lopez start a search like that? I mean, you've got the vision now. Okay, the vision is there. You know, you need a strategy, you need a plan. What's the plan? What's the plan of attack to go
you're
find
not shopping in the same places we're shopping.
No.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
maybe not.
yeah. I mean, part of it's like thinking out of the box. I mean, like,
Yeah.
you know, so for example, in chasing food items, you know, occasionally people will share really unique vintage food items. You know, though somebody will show, a piece from Singapore, or or show something from Finland, and part of the thing, like things like Duncan and I did with our first book, and then getting all that information onto the Star Wars Collectors Archive, was just trying to like first map out what is available. What do we know is available? And by the way, it's a moving target, because we learn, even vintage items, we learn of things that came out like in the past 2 years. And I did a blog post recently on this. I shared about a dozen items that I've picked up only in the last couple of years. They're all vintage food items that we didn't know about basically until the last 2 years. I mean, which is crazy, right? Like, we're almost at 50 years of Star Wars, and we're still discovering things.
It's fun though. Yeah, it's fun to learn, like you said, learn about this new stuff. Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing that you can still learn. And so so then there, I'll have like my sheets of like everything we know was made, but then, I'm updating it and I'm refining it as we get new information. And that and then I have that influences what I'm looking for lists. Sometimes it's random though. Sometimes I get offered something that didn't know about it, and it just sort of lands in my lap because people know what I'm going after.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's researching, like, in cereal boxes, like as I get a bunch of the vintage boxes, you find variations and you start to document that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, in terms of building a strategy, it's like, sometimes it's going out of the box. Like, I'll give an example.
Going out of the cereal box.
The early to mid 90s, I was really interested in the process of making the toys, how Kenner went about doing them, and about the toy prototypes. And this is way before people really were into that stuff. Steve had covered it in Concept to Screen and Collectively showed some of the toy prototypes, and that was pretty inspirational in that, but nobody had really chased it down. And so I started going to Cincinnati, where Kenner was based, and try to meet with Kenner employees. I remember telling a couple friends, like, hey, I'm going to go do these trips to Cincinnati. And they thought I was nuts. Like, why would you go there? And what are the odds? And then some of them started to join me, and we would find so much great stuff that just got unearthed, and nobody really had known about it. And really over those years, a lot of it was in the late 90s and early 2000s, met hundreds of Kenner people. Of course, once we started to do it, a lot of people emulate it. Dealers do it, other collectors do it, which is, people think, well, why'd you share all that information of what you were doing? Well, it's like, I always believe that that a rising tide lifts all boats, that I have way more benefited from, even if you just look at purely like selfishly, like I have benefited way more from sharing information than anything I've disclosed that created a competitive situation that was adverse.
Well, you introduced me to people that got the prototypes that I have. At one of the celebrations, you were like, well, I'll take you up to this room and you can meet these guys. And you introduced me, and I've still been buying stuff from them. So all those years later.
It's through those connections that and so, but anyway, like, broadly, it was like about, just thinking out of the box. And so that's how I sort of do. I'll give another example. With a lot of the food items, the Star Wars food, and that was an area that was really esoteric. Like, very few people were into it. Now it's huge. There's a ton of collectors into the food collectibles. But what I do is, I don't just limit myself to, Star Wars food collecting enthusiasts. I go pursue, who are the food collectors? Who are the people that collect, bottles and like drink bottles or cereal boxes or whatever, fast food items, and who outside of Star Wars, and learn from them, network with them. I've gotten a lot of things from those folks, like, the infamous TV dinner. There was a TV dinner that was sold in the Midwest in the 70s that Duncan has two different versions of it, the Sundown Supper and Safari Supper. And for years, Duncan had the only examples of these TV dinner boxes. And it was through networking with other food collectors that I was able to get the cutout back to one of those boxes, Safari Supper, and then a couple years after that, I did get an intact box of the Sundown Supper. So basically, between me and Duncan, we have 3 of the 3 known boxes of this wow. of this TV dinner. So, but yeah, it was really putting myself out of the usual network and trying to learn from the food collectors who are outside of Star Wars. And so I do that all the time in all my collecting.
Do you also contact the manufacturers themselves, or
yes.
even the distribution centers, or where the stuff was actually put together and manufactured? Do you ever
not
reach out that way?
I have networked with the companies directly. I mean, they're not, and usually it's more a marketing thing. Like I've done some things with where, for example, I've been on some of the blogs with the with the cereal companies and then I'll share my stuff, and usually through the official corporate stuff, and that has opened doors and made contacts for me. A lot of it's really the employees. It's the people who work at those places individually, where as far as sourcing stuff ends up being usually a better thing to tap. But the companies are also great because they love the idea of things getting popular and among fans and collectors, and so I've done some things with them too. But as far as sourcing, it's mostly the individuals.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know. Going back to some of the stuff in your collection, the one thing, one of the Holy Grail things that I would love to have, because I'm fascinated by the way that Kenner toys and other toys are manufactured. And the wax sculpts, I believe I saw you had a wax sculpt in your collection of a Kenner figure.
Yeah.
And I would love to get my hands on one of those. That's been an ultimate Holy Grail of mine. Not just the prototype, but that actual initial wax sculpt. They're so cool looking. And I just remember.
Yeah, I have several of those. The action, so Kenner in general, this is very broad strokes, but basically Kenner, for organic things like action figures, they sculpted in wax. Sometimes there's 1 or 2 sculptors that sculpted in acetate plastic, but wax was common for organic things with curves and sort of lifelike detail. And then things that had straight lines, they would pattern out of wood. They make basically a wood sculpture, mill it out of wood.
Do you have the wooden sculptures too?
I do, yeah.
Oh,
I
have
quite a few of them, actually. There aren't many. For Star Wars, I would say there's about 24 or so known examples today. I have about half of those, so I have quite a few. I have several things for the B-Wing, the Sandcrawler, Darth Vader Star Destroyer play set. So it's quite a few different things. But I love the wood patterns too. The Sandcrawler one is beautiful. It's this huge, it's 2 times the scale of the radio controlled Sandcrawler. So it's an awesome piece. But yeah, coming back to the wax sculpts, I have several of them for the action figures, and those are hot. I mean, people love action figures.
Oh yeah,
that's the original art for the action figure. A lot of those have been getting tougher to collect because
that's why I don't have one.
Well, there's very few, and then
they're hard to find.
There is a collector that's been amassing a pretty impressive set of those, and so people have sold a lot of them to that collector, and so that's also made them kind of scarce now because somebody really is into it, is and is committed,
focused,
very focused on it. I still have a few, but like many collectors, I also occasionally sell stuff, not as often as others, but I have sold some of my sculpts because it allowed me to then, have house money to go buy, some major prop pieces and costume pieces. So that allowed me to do that.
And then the other thing I remember is now you've got these things that were made for the coins.
Yes.
Right. And aren't they big? They're big, right?
Yeah. So this is a great example of, how I approach collecting. With some friends, what we did was we were aware of there's 2 companies that Kenner used to make the Power of the Forest droids and Ewoks coins. So they worked with Worldwide Mint in Minneapolis, and they worked with Osborne Coin in Cincinnati. And so what we did is 2 separate deals with the owners, the CEOs of those companies. And as a result of doing that, my friends and I got basically their artwork coin sculpts, tooling masters, different stages of the masters for tooling, the coin dies, etching plates to do the layout. So we get pretty much a comprehensive, set of artifacts, prototypes from both mints, so represent all of the Power of the Force droids and Ewoks coins.
Wow.
And then, since we love the coins, we basically kept most of it for ourselves. So we have runs of various characters through all the stages and we did let go of a few. We traded and sold a few of them, but the vast majority, the friends who went with me on these kept them, so we still have them. That's why we have so many of them on display, because I just love those things. I don't like letting go of them.
No, it was. I just remember seeing them once when and it was so cool. I just thought, oh my! I couldn't believe how big some of the. So those must have been like art proofs, or what were they?
Yeah, the tooling masters, they do them at a much higher scale, and I want to say 6-to-1 scale, maybe 8-to-1, but it was like it's at a larger scale than the actual coin. So then that way they get the detail. So they sculpt it in plaster, usually, sometimes in wax, on a big plate. And then they make copies of it. They pour a mold, and then we'll do copies of it to get the tooling master that will really guide how they make the dies. And then once they have a tooling master, they have this machine called a pantograph machine that's used to it basically has a stylus that goes over the surface of it, and that's what allows you to create the dies. And in the case of like mold injected plastic toys, it also creates the molds for those. And the way the pantograph works is it traces over the surface of something and then allows you to scale it. You can scale it up, down, same scale. And so for the coins, they scale it down. There's micro collection toys, they're done 4 times. You'll see these like with hard copies and sculpts of the micro collection figures that are like this big to make a figure that's fourth big the size, and so the pantograph allows them to scale it down, and so you get this very detailed sculpt that then makes the final coin, and the coin die is very detailed. And so have a bunch of the coin dies as well as part of the process.
Mm-hmm. Well, Gus, it sounds like you're still a pretty active collector, even though you've got this extensive collection. What you've mentioned a number of things that you're still after, and you're still trying to get, and the cereal boxes being a good example of that.
Yeah.
So I would imagine, just like any of us, some of these things probably feel pretty personal to you and how you relate to them. As it pertains to the Saga Museum, is all of it going, or some of these things staying in Gus's house?
Great question, and I get that question a lot. That and it seems shocking to some people when I answer this way, but like the plan is to have all of it go to the Saga. That's like 100% of it. I mean, it will be a big change. I mean, because right now, and every collector displays their collection in a different way. In our house, it's dispersed all through the house, and we also built a building in the back with more display areas, so everything's displayed sort of museum style throughout our house. But the plan is to have all of that go to the Saga Museum. And it won't happen overnight. It might be when we open the doors, we take out the things that we need for the opening of it, but the idea is that very soon afterwards have all my entire collection either in the archives or on public display, or be on a touring exhibit. And for the different collectors in Saga, it may happen at different times. So I'm sort of all in, as is everybody, but I'm all in to do it right away. So I'm good with having, first of all, the Saga Museum may not be in the city I live in. It may not be in Seattle. So I'm sort of wrap your head around that. You're like, okay, well, I want to be where it is. So we'll have to have a place there and be able to, because I want to have a very active role in developing it. Yeah. And so, it's just basically the way I look at it is my collection. I want it, it sounds weird because people are like, how can you part with your collection? Well, it's going to be on public display. And it's going to have this, this legacy of what you've built up in my own collection will go live on, so it's actually a profound thing. Right. So I'm very comfortable with that. It's nice having people over the house, see the collection, but it's limiting because you can only have so many people at a given time. You have to vet people. It has to be people you know, or that you have friends who know them. Whereas when we were in the public, we can open the doors to everybody and more people can interact with it. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm all in to have it. And I think for the different collectors, it'll be, and some of those, as I mentioned, the 3 other collections are huge. So it might be at different times, but the vision is all the collections will eventually be part of the museum. And as I said, it won't, and that's 1.5 million items, but it won't even be limited to our collections. Over time, it'll be other collections as well.
Yeah. Going along with a little bit of that, is there a, even a collector at your stage, I would imagine, still has some what we call holy grail items you've been looking for
What's
forever.
The grail?
Yeah, is there something that you're still looking for that you really love to have?
Oh yeah, there's always something.
Let me list you the top 10.
Yeah. Okay, I would say if the blockade runner vehicle that Kenner designed, made prototypes of, ever that surfaced, like that's pretty high on my list. Holy grail items. There's another.
Now, does one exist? I've seen photos, but does one actually physically exist? Yeah.
No one knows if it's around today. Like as far as I know, maybe somebody knows that hasn't shared, but I don't know if you guys hear all this background noise, but
yeah, siren now.
They're looking for that grail.
We live in the city and it's hot today, so I got the windows open, so it's a little loud.
And not after you, right?
Anyway, not after me. No, yeah. So the blockade runner, it was photographed by Kenner. They made a styrene prototype of it. As far as I know, no one's located it. But for years, that's what we said about the White Witch. I mean, for decades, literally for decades, we knew of the White Witch. We've seen it in photographs. We weren't even sure it existed, and now I have it in my collection. So that could happen with the blockade runner. There's other things like that. The C-3PO walkie-talkies that Kenner was prototyping. Oh, I mean, that was crazy because that one, they even had like promotional photography, and they were pitching it to retailers. So it got pretty far along in development. And yet, as far as I know, no one's ever found any of the C-3PO walkie-talkies that Kenner was developing. And so I'd love to find those. So there's a couple things in the toy area, but in each of my categories, there's stuff like that. So in movie props, I mean, I'd love to have, more, there it's hard to pick because it's just sort of what comes up. So many, But it just sort of a bit go with what is available. I would love to have more of special effects models. I have some pretty good ones, but I love the special effects models. There are more costumes I could have. I have like a Vader helmet from Empire Strikes Back, the top part, the helmet part, not the face mask part. I would love to have more with Vader. I have a couple great Vader pieces, but it would be cool to have, so yeah, in each category, I always have things I'm going after. So in cereal boxes, there are some Canadian cereal boxes from the 70s that I'm missing. They made about 8 different ones. I have 2 of them. I'd like to get, that's really my biggest gap in the cereal. I have like 2,000 different Star Wars cereal boxes, but I'm missing a few of the vintage Canadian ones.
That is a massive collection of cereal
boxes. That could be its own wing, right there.
Yeah. It'd be fun to do that someday, like a huge gallery of like every Star. I mean, it's over 100 countries. I mean, there's a lot of cereal. In the early days, there were only a few countries. It was like US, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. That was pretty much it for cereal. But now cereal is like a worldwide thing, and that's why my wife Pam does this. When we travel a lot, she always takes photos of me in the cereal aisles in these different countries, like in these crazy countries looking for cereal. So we just went on a trip and she has photos of me in Azerbaijan and Armenia and Georgia looking for cereal and Star Wars cereals in grocery stores.
That's fun.
Yeah, has there been one thing that's been like very, very hard to find and you found it, or something that's been so like difficult to acquire just because the individual wouldn't want to let it go? Is there one thing that sticks out in your mind?
Oh yeah, there are quite a few stories like that.
Okay.
The wood patterns. So a lot of the wood patterns I have was a company that Kenner used, a company based in Michigan that Kenner used for to do the wood patterns, and they had been in contact with these guys for like over 20 years. They had them, but they just could never. It was never clear when they wanted to sell, and they could agree on a price. But it was one of those things like having tenacity and staying with it, and being willing to do the deal. And so that's happened a number of times. Somebody was reluctant, and you just sort of stuck with it. Sometimes it's people don't want to let go of stuff. There's a couple examples of things that people just still haven't been, they may never sell. And by the way, that's not an uncommon thing. So one of the things I've learned, I love to learn from, as I mentioned, from other genres of collecting. And so one of the things I've tried to dive deep into is, so a lot of collectibles follow a very natural life cycle of, there's a generation that grows up with that item, and they had it as a kid, they get nostalgic for it in their 20s, so they start to have little disposable income, so they start to fill a collection. And then really at middle age is when collectors peak in the spending and growth of their collection. So they're like, they have disposable income. If they have kids, they've moved out of the house. So they have, and they're also at the peak of their career. So they're spending a lot at middle age. And then they're elderly, and then they're like, what the hell am I going to do with all this stuff? They're figuring out, what happens to all these things. And so that's very common. I think Star Wars might defy it a little bit, because Star Wars has transcended generations, but by and large, collectibles follow this natural life cycle. And what often happens is that these rare items get into a collection, and basically the only time they ever become available is when their estate is sold after they're gone. That does happen too. And I wouldn't be surprised. It would be natural that would happen in the case of Star Wars as well, where there's some amazing stuff that's in collections, and the person just never wanted to sell it, never wanted to trade it. And the decision, we're all, we all have a limited lifespan. So, that they, at some point that item becomes, comes back out later. So, one of the things we wanted to do with Saga Museum is really be this place where, 100 years from now, people are able to enjoy these things as we did. And so, have a place for it. And so that's sort of the hope with that.
Well, and maybe in some of the, sorry, 1 second, Andy, and maybe in some of those cases where someone's got something they're not really willing to sell, maybe they'll put it in the museum
into the museum. That's
exactly what I was going to say. You've got the hook now, like, hey, this isn't for me, it's for the museum.
That's right. So they can loan us stuff. They don't, that's the thing. They don't have to give it to the museum. They can be on loan and on exhibit. I do that today, right? Like things that I don't give to a museum, but I've loaned it to them. And that would be great. At least it gets out in the public. Like who actually owns it is really less relevant. It's more like, can you get it in front of people so they can enjoy it?
Yeah. If you don't mind, I've got a question here. And speaking of the chat, guys, I know I've just put up some of the hellos. If you do have a really good relevant question, please put it in the chat, and we'll try to get to it. Gap is asking about Star Wars knockoffs that are highly collectible for one reason or another.
Yeah.
Any insights on that?
Yeah, it's not my area of specialty. I know Duncan is particularly strong in it. I mean, the bootlegs and the knockoffs are a huge area of collecting. It has a big
taking off, it seems.
Yeah. I mean, there are holy grails in that space. I have a few examples. I definitely have a few cool pieces from that, but it's not my specialty. And there are a lot of collectors, and that's actually a great example of a category that I'd say all the 4 collections we have examples, but like they aren't the world class collections in that. So that'd be a great example of something where somebody loaned it to Saga or had an exhibit on it. And especially, you could do an interesting exhibit that isn't that doesn't offend, the Star Wars has a license, it's owned by Disney, you want to respect, their intellectual property. But, there is an interesting story there in some parts of the world. Like there's a historical thing of like in the Eastern Bloc, before the fall of communism, Star Wars was even known to those countries that didn't even have access to Star Wars. And so they didn't have official licensees. So they had knockoffs that were sold in some of those countries. And I think it's an interesting historical story of how Star Wars was so part of our culture that it even sort of got past some of these borders that you didn't think it was possible for them to reach. And so that's sort of the role that knockoffs played in those places. But it wasn't, so much to, I don't think they were created so much because they were trying to, compete with like the licensed products. It was more that there was no option for the people in those countries, and so these companies sort of made something to fill that gap.
And that actually ties into the a little bit of the history of what you were saying, like the political climate of those areas just prevented them from getting Star Wars, so they created their own Star Wars.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And some of the East Bloc did have, I think in some of the more open countries, like at the time, like Hungary, Yugoslavia, which wasn't really formally part of the East Bloc, but was a communist country. They actually had Star Wars officially released in those countries in the 80s. But they didn't really have as much like licensed product, right? So they filled gaps. But then there's countries like Poland and Russia that were deep into the East Bloc, and I don't even know when the official releases of the films came out in those countries. If it may not even have happened until after the fall of communism. But there's
91, I think.
Yeah. So like they had to make up for it, but yeah, it's an interesting part of our history, and a lot of people now are born after all this happened. But at the time Star Wars came out, there were sort of two worlds, and Star Wars reached both of them.
Yeah, some of Andy's posters. Andy, you have a poster that you could not recognize as any character from Star Wars whatsoever, but it's a Star Wars poster.
Yeah,
is it the Russian one?
It's a Russian poster. Yeah,
wow. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, some of those, the Russian and Polish posters are amazing. I don't collect many. I'm not deep in the posters. I just collect the posters I like, but I love the Polish Star Wars posters, like the exploding head Vader.
He's like, I got it right here.
I got that one. Well, he's getting the poster.
Yeah. And
I'm gonna ask a non-Star Wars question. If it wasn't Star Wars, what would it be?
Well, I have a lot more money now. Oh, there it is. Like
there it is.
It's one of my favorite posters. It's like, the artist used like not only the image of Vader's head exploding, but there's things like a power, like photography equipment and stuff like that he used as objects if you look at the details of it. It's
there's
amazing.
Camera parts. Yeah.
It's wonderful. Yeah. I mean, no, it's hard to imagine what would my life be without Star Wars, because it's and I'm sure you guys ask that question to yourselves all the time. It's been such a big part of my life. As a kid, I collected, like a lot of kids do, I collected things like baseball cards and coins and things, which in many ways I think prepped me for when Star Wars came out. Like I already as a kid had refined. I think it's hard, and it's strange to explain this to people because I was into baseball cards before that was a big thing. It really didn't become a big thing till the 80s. And even as a kid, I'd have like my parents drive me around to find dealers, like baseball card dealers. And I collected cards from before my time. I mean, I collected like cards of like, Mickey Mantle and Sandy Koufax, things from the 50s that were before my time. I had taste for like, what did I want? Like even as a kid, right? I was like, what do I want in a collection? And how the hell do I find this thing? I was not constrained by that it's impossible to find it. And so then I found a way to do it. It's like, I got to find these collectors. And this is before card collecting became a big thing. So even as a kid, I was like already had that inclination. So Star Wars just, was what was my passion that I did for long term. But yeah, it's hard to imagine what my life would be like without it. It would be, I'd probably just have more time for other things. But
would you have like a little? You have like a little, well, I collect Star Wars. That's my thing. But I also have like all these little Tron. I have a whole complete Tron set over here too.
Yeah, I have a few other things I collect on the side. Star Wars is clearly the main thing. And so for those, I mostly keep it pretty constrained because, it can be a slippery slope to introduce new categories. But I do have a couple nostalgic things that I collect. Like I have I have like Evel Knievel stuff. Other Tron lights. Those are awesome. I love the full string. I never collected Tron, but I thought those were some of the best toys ever. The light cycles. But I actually have a Tron arcade game though. I do have a Tron. I loved as a kid. I played and I played that thing so much at the arcade that I had to own one years later. But yeah, no, I collect Evel Knievel. As a kid, I really liked Evel Knievel. I just thought he was just an interesting character. He was this, just a persona. Like in very many ways, to me, he epitomizes America, like United States, in that you have this guy with this just bizarre skill, like he jumps stuff on a motorcycle, right? And
that's not built for jumping.
Not
Harley
built for
Davidson
jumping, right?
is not the motorcycle of choice.
Yeah, I mean today, because that's a great point. It's like today, right? Like the cycle, they have these light cycles with lightweight cycles that have incredible power, and he was jumping, on 750cc, heavy Harley Davidson motorcycles over. I mean, it was just insane what the guy was doing. But he became world famous. Doing this bizarre skill, and then had like product around it. And to me, it represents something that's, I think, very uniquely American, which is just that we're a culture of weird people that do goofy stuff and just push it, just think independently. And it was just anyway. As a kid, though, I that's how I appreciate it now. As a kid, I just really love Evel Knievel. So I have like a whole, like a huge display case of boxed Evel Knievel toys. I love the Beatles, so I have a few vintage Beatles things I collect. Now that's another vast area of collecting, and I've met many great collectors.
I have a Beatles question, because I saw that you do you know this one? This is the 1984 Capitol Records giveaway to the employees, I believe.
Oh, wow.
16 LP box sets. So you'd never seen that one?
Not seen that. I've seen other box sets of the albums, but I don't think I've seen the Capitol. That's a cool thing.
There's about 80, allegedly 80.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool.
That's
a great piece.
Yeah, and they're all sealed as well, which I was hoping to get your thoughts. And
no, I don't. And the Beatle collecting is vast. What I do there is and this is where, my experience doing it in Star Wars has helped a lot. Like I've focused pretty much on food collectibles and Beatles. And what's interesting in the Beatles space, there aren't really that many people. I haven't really run into people who collect just food items in the way Star Wars. There's a lot of people now who do it, but in Beatles. So that's allowed me to discover a lot of things that it's sort of uncharted, which is crazy. And I mean, there's a lot of well-known stuff in Beatles food collectibles, but I'm surprised that there are things people aren't really aware of broadly in the collecting community there, that there's still niches to discover, just like Star Wars still has some. So there I've been focusing on food collectibles, and there's a lot of really cool, obscure stuff. But it's sort of limited to display case or two of stuff, because I don't really want it. I want to collect what I like, but I don't want it to compete with, my Star Wars collection is the primary thing. So I just, but it's also, in dabbling in these areas, the two examples I gave, Evel Knievel and Beatles, it's like I learn a lot from these other collecting communities. They're all different, and there's a lot I can bring from having done it in Star Wars. So I think the cross-pollination is, and I've also mentioned I talked to like prop collectors and food collectors. So you learn a lot because different collecting communities and genres have different emphasis and different conventions and so on of how they do things. And I think it's a hugely valuable thing to dabble in this way, because you learn a lot from what they've done and haven't done. And so anyway, I've learned a lot from the Beatle collectors, like things that, really got me to think deeply about Star Wars collecting.
Yeah. It's like we said earlier, it's always amazing to me, because I tell people, both with podcasting, YouTube live streams, talking to people, talking to our friends about collecting, getting together at these events and conventions and things, I learn something every single day. There's always something new to learn, even about a topic that you think you've got everything nailed. Suddenly there's something else that pops up and you're like, wow, I've never even knew that or considered that. That's so cool.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. even today, if I go to, like, when I was at Celebration Japan and I just hang out with collectors, I usually leave these social and even local events, wherever, when I meet with collectors, there's always notes I'm taking of like, oh, wow, I just learned about something, and still, learning a lot from other collectors. When I go to events, like I've been to Rancho Obi-Wan a couple times in the last few months, and I meet other collectors there. I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know about this. And it's weird. It's not like you go there like, I'm going to come away with 5 new things that I'm going to collect or things I'm going to learn about. It just happens organically. And I really encourage collectors to put themselves out there and meet other collectors. It's a game-changing thing in collecting.
Yeah. And Rick like says, none of us would know each other or be talking if not for Star Wars. How crazy is that? Yeah. Because for a lot of us, like, I collect a wide variety of things that I grew up with. My collection is essentially the toys and the things that I had when I was a kid, and that can range from Tonka trucks to Star Wars to Transformers, G.I. Joe, Centurions, like the Gambit. I might not have everything from any one collection, but I've got something from everything of my childhood that just reminds me of that time. And but Star Wars, I feel like, sparked that and started that journey, because that's always been the largest part of my collection is Star Wars.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. It's similar to how I think about it. Like, Star Wars is the dominant, like, it's the thing I focus on. It's been my passion, but I still am nostalgic for a couple other things as well. And I do agree that, like, Star Wars has brought a lot of us together, and because they're people of very different backgrounds and experiences and different countries and different age groups and so on. And but what we have in common is this passion for Star Wars. And we may not have met in most cases. We may not have met and interacted had we not, known each other through Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly. Question real quick from Rick here.
Standard question from Rick.
Who's your favorite and why is it Hammerhead? There you go.
Hammerhead's a great one. I would say of the early years, that's one of the very best. I like the Man figure. I always thought the sculpt. And then, have I met George Lucas? I have not. I get asked that a lot. I have been in venues and in settings where he's done a talk, or one time when I was at Skywalker Ranch, I saw him not too far away. But I've never, like, sat down and had a conversation with him. I don't think, I think other than people that worked with him, it's he's not exactly the easiest person to have access to. I've not run into him in public. It would be fun to talk to him someday, but I've never had that opportunity.
He's going to San Diego.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be there, as you know.
There you go.
And he has a panel as well.
It does. I think it's on a Sunday. I think.
Yeah.
On a Sunday panel.
Yeah.
Well, Gus, we've been going on for about an hour. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I want to give Gary and Andy one more chance. Anything else you want to bring up or ask real quick before we let Gus go?
Okay, one more question, because how easy is it for you to part with an item? I seen a recent the Hakes auction has gone live now with the next one, and I think there's an unpainted A-wing that was part of your X collection.
Yeah.
So how easy is it for you to let go of an item?
It's pretty hard for me to let go of items, but I think I don't know. I think on the spectrum of this, I know a lot of collectors have let go of pretty much everything over time. That's not me. And then I know collectors who never let go of anything. I actually think that letting go of stuff is a healthy part of collecting, because you refine your tastes. As a collector, first of all, everybody has a budget. Like, everybody's limited on budget, but and so if you refine your tastes and you know what you're focused on, and you decide, this piece is kind of secondary to me. It's a nice piece in an ideal world, and if I had the space and the ability to house it all, I would keep it. But I can sell this piece and I can parlay it into another thing I get. So that's where I've let go of things. I actually don't let go of that much. I would say about half a dozen to a dozen pieces a year, which is not a whole lot. I mean, they're usually significant pieces when I let go. But take the A-wing first shot. Love the piece. Love the A-wing vehicle. I had it for many years. I had it for over 20 years, and basically, I was like, on my prototype stuff, I have representation of first shots. I have representation of the phases of making a toy. And in some cases for vehicles like the B-Wing, I have a lot of examples. I have prototypes of the B-Wing. I have the patterns for the B-Wing. So I don't need to have it for the A-Wing. And if I sell that piece, I can raise funds to go buy something else. So that's how I rationalize it. But then there are pieces that I would never let go of that I've been offered crazy money for. I was like, nope, it's too core to my collection. I would make a windfall, but my goal isn't money. It's I would just buy more stuff. Like, and so if I let go of something that's part of, what I really want, it would be a gap. I could never refill that gap. So there are a lot of things that I would never let go of.
I love that. I think that's also a great tip. Like you said, everybody's got not an infinite budget. You have a finite budget. And I think it is healthy to let things go, which allows you to then expand your horizons too. So great tip.
And some collectors beat themselves up over letting things go. I'm like, no, I mean, but again, there's a spectrum. There are people, I have friends who are collectors who, and I understand it's a different perspective. They keep things for several years, but everything eventually goes. They're collectors like that, just pretty much cycle through everything. And then there are collectors I know who have this like absolute cannot sell everything. And it's not my approach. I actually think in many ways that has some downsides in that you end up you have all these things in a collection that don't necessarily fit in with other things. But I think it's very healthy to be pruning a collection, saying, okay, I'm going to like sell this thing to double down on this thing I'm really after. I think it's a very healthy thing to do that I embrace. I don't shy away from it. I don't think it's a setback that I let go of this A-Wing first shot. Someone else gets to enjoy it. And in most cases, when I have sold stuff, the stuff I've bought from the raising money, as like if you saw the before and after, you'd be like, oh, I get it why he did that.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Gus, my last question for you is that I follow you on Instagram at Toys R Gus.
Yep.
Is there a better way to follow you or see what you're up to, or is that the best way to do that?
For a lot of my collecting stuff, that's a good way. Also on Facebook, I post things, but my Facebook account, I haven't yet made it into a public one where everybody can follow it. So at some point I might do that, but Instagram probably is the best place. I also started to post some things I have some things I've posted on X and Blue Sky, but Instagram is really the best place, Toys R Gus. And then also, if you go to the Star Wars Collectors Archive, we have a blog there where not just me, but a lot of the Star Wars Collectors Archive has a lot of people collaborating on it. And there's some really great content there where we share information. That's the other place. And so the URL is the theswca.com.
SWA.com. All right.
Put that in the link.
Yeah, I'll put it in the description below this video too. We'll add that to it. All right, Gus, and then I think the last thing before we head on out, can people help support the project of the Saga Museum, and where exactly should we go to help you guys out?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that. So if they go to, you can go to learn more about the Saga Museum, and also if you want to contribute to it, and we also have swag. Also, you can or items you can buy. Like we have a poster and a T-shirt. If you go to ranchoobiwan.org/the Saga Museum, so just all one word, ranchoobiwan.org, ranchoobiwan.org/the Saga Museum, all just one word. Like here, I'll share it in the. Here,
Gab's got the archive there, SWCA. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm sharing those in the chat that you guys see, and then you can share it externally. Yeah. But if you go to ranchoobiwan.org/the Saga Museum, you can learn more. We'll have updates there, and you can also we do need donations. We do need to fundraise. We're doing this big auction at Comic-Con. Didn't really talk about this. A lot of loud street noise. We had this big auction at Comic-Con where we're partnering with Turner Classic Movies and Julian's and the Comic-Con Museum to raise money for the Saga Museum. So we had things that were like duplicates or extras or really interesting items we could put up for auction to raise money for the Saga Museum. And so that's going to be July 27th at the Sunday of Comic-Con. It's going to be a live auction and also an online auction. Some great pieces in that auction. So if you're into Star Wars, check it out. It's a Star Wars exclusive auction. there's, there are other people have also listed things in that auction as well. So that not just stuff from that we're putting up, there's other items in the auction. So yeah, check that out. But that's we're going to be doing many fundraising events. We did one at Rancho Obi-Wan last month. We're going to be doing another one at Rancho Obi-Wan in September. We have future plans for other events for fundraising. So because this is be a journey where we have to raise a lot to pull this off.
That's
Awesome.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, Gus. Looks like everybody in the chat's happy you were here. So,
cool. All right. Okay.
So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot,
Yes.
Gus. I really appreciate you coming on, and thanks to Gary and Andy for joining me on the panel, talking to Gus today. I appreciate you guys showing up and helping out with this panel. Yeah, I just really appreciate you stopping by, Gus. We're all excited about the Saga Museum, and whatever help we can give our community, the people here are all going to be here for you. So just reach out and let us know if there's anything we can do. I'm sure we can rally the guys and come up with it.
I'll take you up on it, and thank you so much for having me on. This is fun.
Yeah.
So I love getting into it. Cool.
Appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. All right, ending stream.